You've been unusually confident lately.
Confident?
You stopped apologizing.
People usually stop apologizing. Your boyfriend, when they finally understand the room.
Dante.
Please. Nobody reacts immediately. But everyone feels it. One executive looks down too quickly. Another adjusts papers that don't need it.
Most people in that meeting still believed Adrian controlled the room. But sometimes, power starts collapsing emotionally, before anyone realizes it. After the meeting ended, nobody spoke immediately. People gathered their papers too carefully, avoided eye contact too obviously. That usually happens after emotional pressure leaves a room. Adrian Vale had built the company that way. Not through shouting, not through threats, but through the atmosphere. People adjusted themselves around him automatically. Their tone, their posture, even their breathing sometimes. Most employees believed that was leadership. Myra never argued with him, never challenged him publicly, which was probably why nobody noticed her at first. She worked quietly inside compliance analysis, watching patterns most people ignored. And over time, she began noticing something strange. The people who feared Adrian the most were usually the same people who changed their stories whenever he entered the room. At first, it didn't seem important. But looking back now, that's where things quietly started changing. People barely noticed Mara during the first few months she worked there. And honestly, that was probably why she noticed so much. The office rewarded loud confidence, fast answers, strong personalities, people who filled silence before anyone else could. Adrian Vale liked employees who sounded certain, even when they were. So most people learned to perform with confidence around him. Too quickly sometimes. That was the strange part. At first, Mara only noticed little things. A manager changed his tone the moment Adrian entered the room. Someone was laughing half a second too late after one of his jokes. Executives repeating the same phrases during meetings as if they had rehearsed them earlier. Nothing dramatic. Just patterns. Most people don't notice this, but groups usually reveal fear through synchronization. The more nervous people become, the more similar they start sounding. Mara never joined conversations unless someone spoke directly to her. Because of that, people filled the silence for her. They assumed things. Quiet girl. Probably nervous. Too soft for leadership. Smart maybe, but socially awkward. One woman in accounting even lowered her voice around Mara sometimes. The way people do when they think someone fragile is standing nearby. Mara never corrected them. That's usually how misreading begins. People see restraint and mistake it for weakness. Late Thursday afternoon, another department meeting dragged past closing time. Adrian stood near the front screen, speaking without notes like always. Calm voice, perfect posture, the kind of control that made people sit straighter without realizing it. Halfway through the presentation, Daniel from operations gave an update on the quarterly report. He sounded confident. Too confident. Myra looked up from her notes slowly. Because 3 hours earlier, Daniel had sounded completely different in the hallway. Back then, he kept touching his watch while talking, repeating himself, avoiding direct eye contact. People usually do that when they're trying to stabilize a decision they already regret. Now he was relaxed. Too relaxed. And that small shift bothered her more than the report itself. Then Adrian interrupted him. Say that part again. Daniel paused. Just for a second. But the room felt it. The revised numbers were approved Monday morning, he said again. Approved. Interesting word choice. Mara noticed two executives glance at each other almost immediately afterward. Tiny reaction, almost invisible. But reactions like that usually happen before people remember their faces are being watched. Something felt off. Not the numbers. The timing. And that was where things quietly changed. Because once someone starts noticing patterns, it becomes difficult to stop seeing them everywhere. Mara lowered her eyes back to the report. But she stopped reading the words. Now she was reading the room. And nobody realized it yet. Not even Adrian. By Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the conference room had changed again. Not openly, just in small ways. People arrived earlier than usual, laptops already open, coffee untouched, conversations are quieter, even the chairs scraping against the floor sounded careful somehow. Adrian hadn't entered yet, but everyone was already adjusting themselves around the idea of him. That's usually how pressure works in places like that. The person doesn't even need to be in the room anymore. People carry the atmosphere for them. Mara sat near the far end of the table, flipping slowly through printed reports. Calm, same expression as always. Daniel walked in 3 minutes late. Nobody mentioned it, but almost every eye in the room lifted at the same time. And that was the first thing Mara noticed. Group fear usually reveals itself through synchronized attention. Daniel tried smiling as he sat down. It didn't fully reach his face. One hand stayed near his phone under the table like he was waiting for something to happen. Then Adrian entered. No greeting. No wasted movement. He placed his folder down once, perfectly straight, then looked around the room without speaking. Silence settled almost immediately. A strange silence, too. Not peaceful. Measured. Adrian finally nodded toward the screen. Continue. The presentation started again, marketing first, then operations. People spoke carefully around him, too careful sometimes. Every sentence sounded pre-checked before leaving their mouths. Halfway through a financial update, one manager stumbled over a number. Sorry, I meant the third quarter, not the second. Adrian leaned back slowly. No, he said quietly, you meant second, then changed it. The manager's mouth opened slightly. Nobody moved. Adrian kept looking at him. Not angry. Almost worse than angry. You should know your own report. The manager swallowed hard and nodded too fast. Right, yes, sorry. And that was where the room tightened again. Most people don't notice this, but the moment embarrassment enters a group setting, people stop thinking clearly. They start thinking safely. After that, everyone became even more careful. Voices softer. Sentences shorter. Nobody interrupted anymore. Except Adrian. He interrupted constantly. Too vague. Answer the question. That's not what I asked. Start again. Every correction changed the room little by little. People stopped speaking naturally. They started speaking strategically. But then, Adrian turned toward Mara. You've been quiet today. A few people glanced at her immediately. Mara looked up from the report. I'm listening. That's not the same thing. Small pause. Most people would have explained themselves there, filled the silence, smiled nervously, tried softening the moment. Mara didn't. She just waited. And something about that seemed to bother him more than disagreement would have. Adrian tapped his pen once against the table. You disagree with something. No. Another pause. Then she added quietly. I just think people explain themselves differently when they feel pressured. Nobody reacted outwardly. But everyone felt it. Daniel looked down immediately after she said it. One executive shifted in his chair too quickly. Someone near the door stopped typing. Adrian's expression barely changed. Barely. But he repeated his next sentence slower than before. Is that your professional opinion? Mara closed the report gently. No, she said. It's just something I've noticed. And for the first time, Adrian looked at her like she wasn't invisible anymore. The next meeting felt different before it even started. Not louder. Actually quieter. People kept checking the door every few seconds. Someone dropped a pen and apologized immediately, even though nobody reacted. Daniel kept rewriting the same line in his notebook without looking at the page. Small things. But small things usually appear first when pressure starts spreading through a group. Mara sat in her usual seat near the end of the table. Same posture, same calm expression. One hand resting lightly on the report in front of her. Adrian entered late this time. That alone changed the room. People straightened instantly. Conversations disappeared halfway through sentences. A woman near the window closed her laptop too fast and nearly trapped her sleeve in it. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt inspected when he walked in. Adrian remained standing for a moment instead of sitting, just looking around. Control sometimes works best when people begin adjusting themselves before anything is even said. Then his eyes stopped on Mara. You reviewed the revised compliance file. Yes. Thoughts? Simple question. But the room tightened anyway. Mara glanced down briefly at the papers. There are inconsistencies. Nobody moved after she said it. Adrian pulled out his chair slowly. Inconsistencies, he repeated. Yes. Be specific. A few people lowered their eyes immediately. Daniel stopped tapping his pen under the table. Mara flipped one page calmly. The approval times don't fully match the revision sequence. Silence. Then Adrian smiled slightly. Not warm. More like someone testing a door handle. You're new here, he said, so maybe you don't understand how fast executive corrections happen. Most people would have backed away there. Softened the statement. Added reassurance. Protected the atmosphere. Mara didn't. She only nodded once. That's possible. Adrian waited, probably expecting more. An explanation. A retreat. Something emotional he could work with. None came. And that was where the rhythm of the room started changing. Most people don't notice this, but pressure depends on movement, hesitation, nervousness, defense. Once those disappear, control becomes harder to measure. Adrian leaned back in his chair. So why mention it? Mara looked at him directly for the first time that morning. Because the sequence changed twice. No emotion. No challenge. Just observation. Something shifted near the far side of the table. One executive reached for water too quickly and missed the glass slightly before grabbing it again. Daniel stopped writing altogether now. Adrian noticed that too. You could tell. His fingers tapped once against the armrest. Then again. Are you suggesting someone altered the file improperly? No. Another pause. I'm saying the timing changed. That answer hung in the room strangely, because it forced everyone to think instead of react. And thinking slows emotional control down. That was the part nobody understood yet. Adrian's smile faded just slightly around the edges. Not enough for most people to notice. But Mara noticed. So did two others at the table. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Long enough for discomfort to become visible. Long enough for people to start hearing their own breathing again. Then Adrian cleared his throat softly and moved to the next topic too quickly. And that small decision told Mara more than the conversation itself. Because people usually change subjects fastest when they realize pressure is no longer working the way it used to. And for the first time, the silence no longer belonged to Adrian. Tuesday afternoon brought another review meeting. Smaller this time. Only 6 people were inside the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the screen at the front cycled through revised compliance summaries. Nobody looked fully comfortable anymore, not after the last meeting. Even the pauses between conversations had started lasting longer. Mara noticed that first. People were becoming careful around each other now. Not just around Adrian. That changes a workplace faster than most people realize. Daniel arrived carrying 2 folders pressed tightly against his chest. He sat down without speaking and immediately adjusted the alignment of his papers 3 different times. Across from him, Evelyn from finance kept checking her email even when nothing new appeared. Then Adrian entered. Calm again. Too calm, maybe. Like someone correcting an atmosphere before it spread too far. "Let's make this quick," he said. Everyone nodded almost automatically. The meeting started moving through revised timelines and authorization records. Adrian controlled the pace carefully now. Faster transitions, fewer pauses, less room for people to think out loud. But then, Mara noticed something strange. Evelyn used the phrase, "standard correction sequence." 3 minutes later, Daniel used the exact same phrase. Not similar. Exact. Mara's eyes lifted slowly from the report. At first, it didn't seem important. People repeat company language all the time. But then Daniel added another sentence. Nothing unusual occurred during secondary adjustment. Evelyn had used almost those same words earlier too. Same structure. Same rhythm. Something felt rehearsed. Most people don't notice this, but when people prepare the same story together, they usually focus too much on consistency. Natural conversations breathe differently. Mara stayed quiet. She started turning pages more slowly now. Timestamp. Revision. Approval. Delay. Then another detail surfaced. One file showed approval at 9:14 a.m. But the referenced adjustment inside the same document had supposedly happened 19 minutes later. Mara looked back at the screen. Nobody else reacted. Not even slightly. Because nobody else was tracking behavior anymore. They were tracking tension. That was the difference. Adrian interrupted another employee halfway through a sentence. Stay focused. The employee apologized immediately. Too quickly. Fear shortens people's reactions. They rush toward emotional safety before they even understand what they're defending themselves from. Meanwhile, Mara kept watching. Evelyn touched her necklace every time secondary approvals appeared on screen. Daniel blinked harder whenever timestamps were mentioned. And Adrian stopped looking directly at the reports during those moments. Instead, he watched the people reacting to them. That was the part Mara almost missed. Nobody said it out loud. But Adrian wasn't monitoring information anymore. He was monitoring emotional stability. And suddenly, the entire room made more sense. Mara leaned back slightly in her chair. Small movement. But Adrian noticed. His eyes shifted toward her immediately. What is it? The room went still again. Mara glanced once more at the document in front of her. Then at Daniel. Then Evelyn. Neither of them looked up. Interesting. She closed the folder softly. Nothing, she said. but her voice changed slightly on that word. Not nervous. Certain. And for the first time, Adrian looked at the reports like he wasn't fully sure what they contained anymore. By the end of the week, people had started speaking differently around Adrian. Not openly different, just smaller, more careful. Questions became shorter, meetings ended faster. Employees started watching his face before finishing sentences, trying to predict reactions before they arrived. But something else had changed too. Now people were watching Mara sometimes. Quick glances, small pauses, a second too long. Nobody understood why yet, but everyone felt something shifting underneath the normal routine of the office. Thursday morning started badly. The projector failed twice during a financial review, and Adrian reacted faster than usual. Can someone fix this? Too sharp. The IT assistant nearly dropped the cable trying to reconnect it. His hands moved too quickly. Apologies started before the mistake even finished happening. Adrian exhaled loudly and looked away. Nobody spoke after that. Most leadership collapses begin with emotional overcorrection. People sense instability long before they understand where it's coming from. Once the screen finally returned, the meeting continued. Or tried to. Adrian interrupted constantly now. No, start again. You skipped the point. That's not what the numbers say. At first, it sounded like control. But after a while, the interruptions stopped feeling precise. They started feeling restless. Mara noticed it immediately. He wasn't correcting information anymore. He was correcting the atmosphere. And that's usually how people act when they feel uncertainty, growing somewhere they can't fully reach. Daniel gave an update midway through the meeting. Halfway through his explanation, Adrian cut him off again. You're rambling. Daniel stopped instantly. The room went quiet. Then Adrian started explaining the report himself. Too much explanation. Too detailed. He repeated points nobody questioned. Even clarified numbers before anyone challenged them. Something felt off. Confident people usually simplify. Uncertain people overmanage details. Mara sat still through all of it. No notes this time. Just observation. At one point, Adrian looked directly at her while speaking, almost like he was waiting for a reaction. She gave none. Not agreement. Not disagreement. Nothing. And somehow, that seemed to affect him more than criticism would have. His packing changed after that. Vaster speech. Shorter pauses. A smile appearing too suddenly during tense moments. Nobody consciously noticed it. But emotionally, the room had already started reorganizing itself around the instability. Evelyn stopped volunteering answers first. Daniel checked Adrian's reactions less often now. Even the junior staff began speaking with tiny delays before responding, like part of them was reconsidering the rhythm they used to follow automatically. That was the part nobody understood yet. People weren't becoming brave. They were becoming observant. And once observation replaces emotional obedience, control starts weakening in very quiet ways. Near the end of the meeting, Adrian turned toward Mara again. You've been very quiet lately. Soft tone. Almost casual. But everyone looked at her immediately. Mara met his eyes calmly. I've been listening. Adrian smiled again. Too quickly. And what exactly have you been hearing? Small pause. Mara glanced once around the room before answering. The parts people repeat. Nobody moved after she said it. Not even Adrian. But his fingers tightened once around the edge of the table before slowly letting go. And for the first time, the room stopped feeling emotionally arranged around him. Monday's executive review began 20 minutes late. Nobody complained about it. People rarely complain when uncertainty starts spreading through a place. They become quieter instead, more observant, like passengers feeling turbulence before the pilot says anything. Rain clouds dimmed the windows behind the conference table. Half the lights reflected against polished wood and untouched coffee cups. Nobody looked relaxed anymore. Not even Adrian. He hid it well, but not perfectly. Mara noticed him rereading the same page twice before the meeting started. Small thing, most people would miss it. But repeated behavior usually means repeated thought. And repeated thought often means doubt. The meeting moved slowly at first. Numbers, reports, forecast revisions. Normal on the surface. But underneath it, something kept pulling people's attention sideways. Nobody focused naturally anymore. Everyone kept tracking reactions. Daniel especially. Every time Adrian spoke, Daniel looked up too quickly. Every time compliance reports appeared on screen, his jaw tightened slightly before relaxing again. That's usually how people act when they're trying to appear calm before they actually feel calm. Then Mara spoke. Quietly. Why was the report revised after approval? The room stopped moving. Not dramatically. Just enough. Someone near the end of the table froze halfway through lifting a cup. Evelyn's fingers paused above her keyboard without touching the keys. Adrian answered first. Because corrections were needed. Mara nodded once, then looked back at the document. After approval. Silence. Longer this time. Adrian leaned back slowly. Yes. No irritation in his voice yet. But the pace changed. People feel packing changes before they understand emotional shifts. That was the part nobody recognized yet. Mara turned one page. Paper sliding softly through the silence. Who requested the secondary authorization? Nobody answered immediately. And suddenly, people stopped watching Adrian. They started watching each other. That was new. Daniel looked toward Evelyn. Evelyn avoided his eyes. Another executive uncrossed his arms slowly, like he suddenly felt too visible sitting there. Adrian noticed it. You could tell by the way he straightened in his chair. The authorization followed normal procedure, he said quickly. Too quickly. Myra didn't respond right away. She just looked at the timestamp again. Then at Daniel. And something about that small glance made Daniel start explaining before anyone asked him to. It was only temporary, he said. The adjustment needed immediate clearance. Nobody had accused him of anything. That's what made the room feel strange. Most people don't notice this, but the moment someone begins defending themselves before being challenged, the atmosphere changes immediately. Adrian interrupted. That's enough. Sharp this time. Too sharp. Daniel stopped talking so fast his lips remained slightly parted afterward. Nobody moved. The silence afterward felt uneven now, not controlled, more like people quietly calculating things in real time. Mara closed the folder gently. No victory. No expression. Just observation. And that made the discomfort worse somehow. Because people can survive pressure more easily than uncertainty. Then Adrian spoke again. Is there a point you're trying to make? Myra looked at him calmly. No, she said. Small pause. I'm trying to understand why everyone became nervous at the same moment. Nobody looked at Adrian after that. And for the first time, the room began feeling dangerous in a completely different way. After that meeting, people stopped lingering near each other. That was new. Normally, after tense executive reviews, employees gathered in quiet groups near elevators or coffee machines, pretending to discuss work, while actually releasing pressure together. Not this time. Now conversations ended quickly whenever someone else approached. Doors closed softer. Voices dropped lower. People started checking who was nearby before speaking. And the strangest part was this. Nobody fully knew what they were afraid of anymore. Most people can handle pressure when they understand where it's coming from. Uncertainty is harder. Uncertainty makes people start studying each other. Mara noticed it everywhere. Daniel stopped using company phrases naturally. Now he paused before certain words, almost like he was filtering them first. Evelyn became overly precise during emails. Timestamps, attachments, confirmations, everything is documented too carefully. At first, it looked responsible. But overcorrection usually appears when trust inside a system starts weakening. Wednesday afternoon brought another closed-door review. Smaller room this time. No projector. No presentation. Just printed reports spread across the table like evidence. Nobody wanted to call evidence yet. Adrian spoke less during the first 10 minutes. That alone unsettled people. Because when emotionally controlling people become quieter suddenly, everyone starts listening harder. Daniel cleared his throat halfway through a budget discussion. We followed the standard approval sequence. Silence. Then Evelyn added almost immediately. Exactly, everything moved through authorized review channels. Myra looked up slowly. Same rhythm again. Same wording. Not rehearsed perfectly. Rehearsed recently. That was the difference. People reveal themselves in pattern long before they reveal themselves in facts. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Is there a concern here? Nobody answered immediately. And that hesitation changed something. Before, people rushed to reassure him. Now they hesitated first. Tiny shift. Dangerous shift. Myra opened one of the folders calmly. Pages sliding softly against each other. Then she asked, why were 3 approval records submitted from the same terminal? Nobody moved. Daniel looked toward Evelyn automatically before catching himself too late. There it was. A pattern. Not in the documents. In the reactions. Adrian answered before either of them could. The system logs overlap sometimes. Fast answer. Too fast. Mara nodded gently, but only after manual consolidation. Silence again. Longer now. The air inside the room started feeling heavier somehow. Even the sound of breathing became noticeable. Nobody said it out loud, but people had stopped trusting the emotional rhythm Adrian usually controlled. And once that happens, every reaction becomes visible. Daniel rubbed both palms slowly against his pants under the table. Evelyn stopped making eye contact completely now. One executive near the window shifted twice in his chair before finally speaking. So what exactly are we saying here? Interesting question. Not to. She's wrong. Not to. This makes no sense. Just. What are we saying? That's usually how people speak when certainty starts breaking apart internally. Myra closed the folder softly. We're saying people approve things faster after pressure increases. Nobody interrupted her. So she continued. Then the records started matching each other too perfectly. Adrian smiled suddenly, but it arrived too late. Like a reaction chosen after thinking about it. You're building assumptions from incomplete information. Mara met his eyes calmly. No, she said quietly. I'm noticing what changes when people become afraid of disappointing someone. And for the first time, nobody looked to Adrian to decide how the room should feel. The change became obvious the following week. Not because anyone said anything directly, because people stopped reacting automatically. That was new. During Monday's operations meeting, Adrian corrected a department manager halfway through a presentation. Normally, the room would have tightened instantly after something like that. Eyes lowered, pens stopped moving. Someone usually rushed to support him emotionally without realizing it. This time, nothing happened. Just silence. The manager paused, adjusted the paper in front of him once, then calmly continued speaking. Adrian looked up slowly. You could tell he noticed it. Most people don't notice this, but authority often survives through emotional rhythm. Once people stop reacting on cue, the atmosphere changes very quickly. Mara sat quietly near the center of the table now, instead of the far end. Nobody assigned her that seat. It just happened naturally over time. Interesting how groups reorganize themselves emotionally before they realize they're doing it physically too. The meeting continued. A budget discrepancy appeared on screen. Adrian immediately answered before anyone asked him to. The adjustment was already reviewed. Fast response again. But now people hesitated before accepting answers. That hesitation was becoming visible everywhere. Daniel looked at the screen longer than usual. Evelyn frowned slightly instead of nodding automatically. Someone near the window finally asked, "Reviewed by who?" The room went still afterward. Not shocked. Thinking. That was different. Adrian answered carefully this time. Executive compliance. Which executive? Another pause. Nobody would have asked that question 2 weeks earlier. Fear of embarrassment had controlled too much of the room back then. People protected emotional comfort more than clarity. Now the balance was shifting. Adrian smiled lightly, but it stayed on his face too long. You're making routine approval sound suspicious. Nobody agreed with him immediately. That silence mattered. People reveal themselves in small delays, especially when belief starts weakening. Myra watched the room instead of the reports now. That was the real story anyway. Not numbers. Behavior. Daniel finally spoke. Quiet voice. The timestamps still don't fully line up. The room turned toward him almost at once. And Daniel seemed surprised by his own sentence after it left his mouth. Like honesty escaped before fear could stop it. Adrian looked at him carefully. Very carefully. You signed the revisions yourself. There it was. Pressure. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just redirected responsibility. Daniel's fingers tightened around his pen. But then, something unexpected happened. Evelyn spoke before he could answer. He wasn't the only one. Nobody moved after that. Adrian blinked once. Small reaction. Easy to miss. But everyone felt it. That's the part nobody understood yet. The room wasn't turning against Adrian. It was turning toward uncertainty. And uncertainty breaks emotional control faster than rebellion ever could. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. You all seem very confused suddenly. No response. Not because people agreed. Because they were thinking. That frightened him more. You could hear it in the way he started talking faster afterward, explaining procedures nobody questioned, clarifying details nobody challenged. The confidence was still there officially. The title. The authority. The final approval. But emotionally, The room no longer moved with him automatically. And Adrian knew it. For the first time, he started looking around the table not like a leader managing people, but like someone checking whether the ground beneath him was still stable. Friday's board review was supposed to restore order. At least that was the intention. The executive floor had been unusually quiet all morning. People walked softer somehow. Conversations ended when elevators opened. Even the reception staff looked emotionally tired. Pressure does that after a while. Not dramatic pressure. Sustained pressure. The kind people carry home without realizing it. Mara arrived early and found the conference room already half full. Nobody was really talking, just pretending to organize papers while watching each other through reflections in laptop screens. Then Adrian entered. Perfect suit. Perfect posture. Controlled expression. But something felt rehearsed now. That was new. Confident people usually move naturally. The moment confidence becomes performance, other people start feeling it emotionally before they understand why. Adrian remained standing instead of sitting. I think we've allowed speculation to distract this company long enough. Nobody answered. He continued anyway. The compliance irregularities being discussed are procedural, nothing more. His voice was steady. Carefully steady. Mara noticed him looking around after almost every sentence now. Tiny glances, quick checks. Measuring reactions. And that's usually how people act when they no longer trust the atmosphere to stay with them automatically. Daniel sat near the middle of the table staring at his hands. Evelyn looked exhausted. One executive near the wall kept pressing his thumb against the edge of a folder over and over without realizing it. Adrian placed both palms lightly against the table. If anyone here believes misconduct occurred, he said, then speak clearly now. Silence. Long silence. At first, it looked like control returning. But then, something strange happened. Nobody rushed to reassure him. No quick. Of course not. No nervous laugh. No emotional rescue. Just people sitting there. Thinking. That small difference changed the entire room. Most people think collapse looks loud. But often, it begins the moment people emotionally stop participating. Adrian smiled slightly. Too sharply. So that's where we are now. Still nothing. The silence around him no longer moved with his rhythm. It resisted him, quietly. Mara watched Daniel carefully. His breathing had slowed. Interesting. Fear usually speeds people up. Relief slows them down. And for the first time in weeks, Daniel looked less afraid of Adrian than of the truth itself. Adrian turned suddenly toward Mara. You've had a lot to say indirectly. The room tightened again. But now I'd like something direct. Mara met his eyes calmly. Adrian waited, probably expecting caution, hesitation, defensiveness. Instead, Mara asked quietly, do you want honesty or agreement? Nobody moved after that. One person near the end of the table slowly lowered their pen. Another finally looked directly at Adrian for the first time all morning. And something inside the room shifted permanently. Adrian laughed once. Short sound. Forced. You think this is about me controlling people? Nobody answered him. Not even the people who used to support him automatically. That was the real moment. Not the question. The absence afterward. People reveal loyalty through instinct, and instinct had stopped protecting him. Adrian looked around the room slowly now. Actually looking. Searching faces. Searching reactions. searching for the emotional rhythm that used to carry him effortlessly through every meeting. But nobody followed him anymore. Not emotionally. Not automatically. And for the first time, the silence isolated him instead of empowering him. The office became quieter after that meeting. Not happier, just quieter. The kind of quiet that appears after people stop pretending not to notice things. Monday morning arrived without the usual tension rushing through the executive floor. Employees still worked carefully, still spoke softly, but something important had disappeared from the atmosphere. Performance. People no longer looked around before every sentence. They no longer rushed to agree with whoever spoke first. Even small conversations sounded more natural now, uneven, human again. At first, it didn't seem important. But once emotional pressure weakens inside a group, people slowly begin sounding like themselves again. Mara noticed it near the coffee station first. Daniel disagreed with someone openly about a report correction. Small disagreement. Normal disagreement. And nobody froze afterward. Nobody checked Adrian's reaction. Nobody laughed nervously to soften the moment. The conversation simply continued. That would have been impossible a few weeks earlier. Adrian still came to work every morning. Still wore the same sharp suits. Still entered meetings carrying authority with him. Officially, nothing had changed. But emotionally, everything had. People reveal belief through instinct, and instinct had stopped arranging itself around him. During Wednesday's review session, Adrian corrected an analyst twice in the first 10 minutes. The analyst paused, then calmly explained the reasoning anyway. No apology. No shrinking voice. Just explanation. Adrian looked almost surprised afterward. Like he was hearing resistance in a language he no longer understood. Something felt strange about that. Not dramatic. Just unfamiliar. Mara sat quietly near the window taking notes she rarely looked at again. She never interrupted anyone, never exposed people publicly, never tried controlling the room herself. That was important. Because this story was never about replacing one dominant voice with another. It was about what happens when people finally see the emotional structure underneath a system. And once people see it clearly, they stop feeding it automatically. Most people think power disappears through confrontation. Sometimes it disappears through observation instead. Late Thursday evening, Mara passed the large conference room on her way out. The lights were still on inside. Adrian sat alone at the far end of the table, staring at old reports spread around him. Not angry. Not defeated. Just still. For a moment, he looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone trying to understand when the room stopped moving with him. Mara paused briefly outside the glass wall. Then kept walking. No victory speech. No final confrontation. No humiliation. Because some endings don't arrive as explosions. They arrive as realization. And realization is usually quieter. The following Monday, meetings started on time again. People asked harder questions now. Not aggressive ones. Honest ones. The atmosphere no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to awareness. And that changes groups permanently. Looking back now, Adrian didn't lose power because someone stronger arrived. Sometimes, people lose power because the room finally sees the emotional structure clearly. Most people think authority lives in titles. In offices, families, friendships, even silence. But sometimes, Authority survives only because nobody questions the emotional rules inside the room. And once people start noticing those rules, everything changes. That's usually the part people miss. Not the shouting, not the pressure, not even the fear. The real shift happens quietly. The moment people stop adjusting themselves automatically. The moment they start thinking instead of reacting. Looking back now, Adrian didn't lose the room in one meeting. He lost it little by little. Every time someone hesitated before agreeing. Every time silence stopped protecting him. Every time people looked at each other instead of looking to him. Control rarely disappears all at once. Sometimes, people simply wake up to the atmosphere they've been living inside for too long. And once that happens, even the quietest person in the room can change everything without raising their voice. Thank you for being here. And there's another story waiting for you.